Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a very special Halloween episode for you. For the first time on this channel, we are going to be doing a deck doctor, in which we look over a deck sent in by one of our viewers and give suggestions for modifying it. And today the deck we're going to be looking at is Wilhelt the Rotcleaver, a very appropriate zombie deck for Halloween. So without further ado, let's get started. And as mentioned, this is a Wilhelt the Rotcleaver deck. So this kind of deck is going to be focused on a few things. First, it's going to be focused on zombie tokens, of course, because Wilhelt wants zombies to die so he can get those decayed zombie tokens, but it doesn't actually care about whether the creatures that die are tokens or not, so obviously this synergizes very well with tokens. And then also he has an ability that is going to reward us for sacrificing zombies and drawing a card. The list that our viewers sent in is a pretty good list to start off with. It's got a lot of all the things that this deck kind of needs, like anthem effects, death triggers, all of that kind of good stuff. However, there are a few small things that can be tweaked, so we've made a few changes to the deck, a few suggestions, and this should hopefully also give you an idea to how I approach deck building and what are the things I take into consideration when making a deck. Of course, in the future, I will be opening this up for everyone. When I reach 1,000 subscribers, I will be able to post community posts, and then I will be accepting your decks, and I can give you suggestions for what you should change if you want me to do so. But anyway, without further ado, let's get started looking at this list. So one of the things I've noticed when I first look at this list is that it has a lot of good creatures and a lot of good death triggers, but it is on the expensive side. So one of the first things I want to look over are the mana rocks. Now, in general, I want to have at least 10 mana rocks in each deck I'm running, although some of them don't necessarily have to be mana rocks. They can also be discount cards that make our things cheaper. So let's look at what we've got in this deck. We've got Arcane Signet, Ashnod's Altar, we've got Crowded Crypt, Dimir Signet, Phyrexian Altar, Soul Ring, and Talisman of Dominance. That's for the artifact part of things. So that is actually giving us 7 artifacts that add mana, but 2 of them require us to sacrifice creatures, both of the altars. I don't usually count those as a full card because they kinda are a bit situational. Sometimes you may not have a creature to sacrifice, and it is kind of a cost. You can't just use them turn after turn after turn in certain circumstances. So while they are very good cards, they don't count as a full mana rock in my opinion. So that gives us about 5 so far. If we look at the creatures, we have Undead Warchief, that's gonna make our zombies cheaper, and Pitiless Plunderer. Again, I'm not gonna count it as a full mana ramp because it's not completely under our control always. That being said, it's still half a mana ramp and it's a very good card. Obviously, it's super broken in this deck, and we have a few ways to go infinite with this deck, even though the deck isn't built around that. And then in the enchantments section, we've got Rooftop Storm. So that gives us about 6.5 ramp effects in this deck. That is very much on the low side. That being said, the deck is running 37 lands, which is pretty decent. It's a pretty good amount. I recommend from 36 to 38. I tend to not go under 36 because I have a habit of not drawing my lands, and I'm pretty sure this person who sent the deck in does too. So yeah, we don't really want to cut too many lands. When we take all of that into consideration, we've got about 44 cards that add mana in one way or another in this deck. That's okay, but it is a little bit on the low side, so I want to at least add one more, and the card I'm going to be adding is Mind Stone. I'm going to add Mind Stone into this deck just because it's a really good mana rock. It comes down on 2. It's going to ramp into Wilhelt on 4, so that's really nice. We're going to add it to the deck. That's going to give us a little bit more consistency. As for the Mind Stone, I'm going to be taking out Reanimate for it. Reanimate is an excellent card, but I want this deck to be a little bit more focused. I don't feel like it's going to do enough in this deck. Most of the creatures are kind of cheap anyway, and it's just going to be a value play that's actually going to cost us life, and we do have a lot of cards that are costing us life as well. So yes, I think that's a good one to take out for Mind Stone. While we're on the topic of mana and lands, this deck is a little bit low on good dual lands, and that's because it is a fairly budget deck. The player has got some good cards at his disposal, but he hasn't got the best mana base, so we're going to try to work on that as well. We're going to add Ash Barrens in. I think this is a very good card, and we're just going to substitute it for a Swamp. It's one of the best fixes on a budget in my opinion, because if you have time, you can just cycle it to basically get whatever land you need. Otherwise, it comes in as a colorless land, it's untapped, so it's very low opportunity cost. And next up, we're moving on to Flip the Switch. Now, this is an interesting card. The player put it in because it does work well with zombies. It's going to make a Decayed token. However, Decayed has a bit of anti-synergy with Wilhelt in the first place, and also this is just a very weak counterspell because late game people can just pay 4 mana and have whatever it is resolved. So yes, it is on theme and it is cute, but it's just not really good enough for 3 mana in Commander. So I would recommend substituting this for An Offer You Can't Refuse. You've seen this in a lot of my decks. I think it's a really powerful card that's going to offer us some protection for very cheap. This deck is a very on-board deck, so we do want to have a way to interact with our opponents. That's one of the things I would recommend if you can find ways to cut other cards, is to add in more interactions such as counterspells. I'm trying to leave my friends list mostly unchanged and just tune it up a little bit. So yeah, it's a pretty straight switch, get it, from Flip the Switch to An Offer You Can't Refuse. Next up, we are going to look at Reality Shift. Now, Reality Shift is actually a very good card. It's good on a budget, but we do have access to black in this deck, so there's really not much reason to dip into this. However, seeing as we're already in blue anyway, and black and blue have issues dealing with artifacts, there is a better effect that costs exactly the same, and that is Resculpt from Strixhaven. This card is very good in the deck. I think it's actually a lot better than Reality Shift, even though Reality Shift only gives a 2/2 and Resculpt gives a 4/4. The downside from Reality Shift is actually bigger because you might give them something that then they can actually flip over and beat you with later on in the game. There's some really awkward plays with this, and just Resculpt also gives you the opportunity to deal with an artifact. That is huge in these colors. It's not that easy to do, so I think it's a pretty straight upgrade. Next up, we have Vengeful Dead. It's a creature that's going to ping every opponent when one of our zombies dies. This seems really good in the deck, and it is very good. It's a zombie as well, which means it has synergy with a lot of our stuff, but it is a little bit awkward because it's a 3/2 for 4 mana. That's not ideal, and there's just better cards that do the same thing. It also doesn't gain us life, and as I've mentioned, we need ways to gain life in this deck. We have a lot of things that are costing us life, so I recommend taking out Vengeful Dead and just putting in something like Zulaport Cutthroat in. It's going to basically achieve the same effect. Whenever our creatures die, it's going to ping each opponent, and we're going to gain life as well in addition. It's not a zombie, but it comes down for 2 mana less, and it just seems like a much better deal. Paying 4 mana for this and skipping your whole turn 4 is just not a great play. I feel like Zulaport Cutthroat is going to let us double spell a lot more. For basically the same reasons, we are also taking out Plague Belcher. Plague Belcher is a little bit better than Vengeful Dead, I would say. It's got a better body. It can also have a little bit of synergies by killing our stuff if we need it to, but it's just not as good as something like Blood Artist, which is also a budget card, and it costs 1 mana less. Blood Artist isn't each opponent, but it's still going to trigger on all of our stuff dying. It's going to gain us life, and it doesn't require us to put -1/-1 counters on our other creatures. It also costs 2 mana instead of 3, so it's just a pretty straight upgrade again. Next up, we have Puppet Stitcher, and this is one of the most difficult ones to cut, I feel. It's a very good card in the deck. It does have some synergy because you're going to have 3 tokens, and it's going to flip into something that makes all of your tokens 3/3 and not have Decayed. So it means your tokens are going to gain permanence. That being said, we have so many ways in this deck to benefit from our creatures dying that we actually don't care if our Decayed tokens die or not. It's actually beneficial for us many times for them to die. So I just don't see this in the deck. It doesn't do enough. Also, the front side isn't really going to trigger that often because we only have 14 instants or sorceries in the whole deck. That means that we're not going to be benefiting as much as we can from this card. I think there's a way better card that could be included that basically does the same thing as the flip side of this does, but it does it even better, and it's just so good in this deck, and that card is Death Tyrant. Death Tyrant is really sweet. Whenever any of our attacking creatures die, token or not, we are going to get a 2/2 zombie without Decayed. Now remember, the zombie tokens that have Decayed from Wilhelt are going to die at the end of combat, but they still count as attacking creatures. So that means they're just going to upgrade into a 2/2 without Decayed. That's really awesome. The card that comes in is also a zombie as well, which works for synergy in our deck. If that wasn't enough, it's also going to make it really hard for our opponents to block, because anytime a blocking creature dies, we're also going to get a 2/2 zombie. So it just does so many different things in this deck. But if that wasn't even enough, if it does get removed, we can actually keep bringing it back. So when you can bring one of the best creatures in your deck back, it's a lot of inevitability. I feel this card is very underplayed in Commander, but in this particular deck, it just fits so well, and it does a lot of what Puppet Stitcher is doing, but it does it better, and also without putting a big trigger on your head, because I feel like Puppet Stitcher is one of those cards that people kind of get alarmed about and react to immediately, whereas whereas Death Tyrant might still fly under the radar a little bit. But make no mistake, it is an incredibly powerful card in this deck. And finally, our last cut of the deck is going to be Victimize. Victimize is a great card. It's also a good card in this deck when we're sacrificing stuff. But again, as with Reanimate, it's not really what the deck is trying to do. Getting back 2 creatures from the graveyard is okay, but there's also a lot of other ways we can recur our creatures in this deck. We have a lot of effects that let us bring a creature back from the graveyard to our hand. Our creatures are all cheap, so we're not going to be getting maximum value from this. Anyway, I think we still need a bit more card draw in the deck. We have quite a bit of card draw, but I would just like to have that little bit more. So we're going to take our Victimize and we're going to put in Minions Murmurs. This is another card that many people may not be familiar with. It's basically going to be another copy of Distant Melody in this deck. It's going to be a little bit better actually because we've added a few cards that are not zombies into the deck, and Minions Murmurs is going to let us draw cards off of them too. We are going to be losing some life, but then we have also added a bunch of cards that gain us life, so that's actually going to balance out quite nicely, I feel. It just draws a lot of cards in the deck. If you do have a higher budget, you could go for Pact of the Serpent that basically achieves the same effect. Again, it's going to draw you some cards. I feel like the deck has a lot of card draw, but we still want that little bit more to make it a bit more consistent. So to recap, what we've done to change the deck is we've added a bit more interaction, bit more card draw, a bit more ramp, and we've cut some cards that were a little bit clunky or that didn't really fit what the deck was trying to do for things that are more synergistic with the deck. This should make the deck more streamlined, more focused at its game plan, which is just attacking with small creatures and getting death triggers, and overall it should make the deck more consistent to play. Ash Barrens is also going to help in the lands part to make our draws a little bit smoother. So, there you have it. What do you think of our deck doctor? Was this informative? Did you like to see this kind of content? Let me know in the comment section below. I read all your comments and respond to all of them too. And if you like this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. We're currently growing the channel and it helps a lot. And if you really enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my Patreon. It would help me so much because I'm currently trying to make this my full-time gig. And until next time, happy Halloween and take care.